Well, I'm cutting this big slab into two beams, and I ran out of gas like 3 feet from the end, so I got to mix up some more. But this would be a good time to show, I've talked about this before, but the tension that's in wood, in a log, it isn't like a solid, there's tension all the time. Now, as I'm cutting this has split apart on this end a good 4 inches. Now, I know this happens, and I planned accordingly. That's why I'm splitting the center of the log right. You can see right here is the core. That way, when these go in, these will be for floor joists. They'll be tipped. This will be the up part, so it'll be pre-stressed. There'll be a slight bow in the center of the floor until the weight gets on it. Then it's going to level out, which is much better than having a floor that sags, that will never come up. A very similar thing if you've ever been behind a flatbed semi on the highway and you notice that the bed of the semi, if it's unloaded, is arched up. That's pre-stressed. Then when they put a load on it, it'll flatten out. You'll see them hauling like big rolls of steel, and the bed will be perfectly flat. But as soon as they take them off, then it gets a big arch on it. It's just pre-stressed, and that's what I'm doing with the flooring. Plenty strong. You'll be able to waltz elephants in there, but I tend to overbuild. Like I said, I'm going to mix up gas, and this is something I thought was worth mentioning. A lot of people don't realize that the marks that are on these cans, unless you look closely, you don't realize that that's actually an imperial gallon. A lot of these little cans come with imperial gallons, and that is actually equal to 1.25 US gallons. So if you fill it up to that mark, you're going to burn your saw off. You have to always compensate for that. I use this can for mixing because I actually went and measured out exactly how much, where a gallon goes on this, so I know. But don't just think that a gallon can, fill it to the mark and it's going to be a gallon. It's going to be over a gallon, and it'll run too lean. And when you think there's very little oil you're putting in there in the first place, you don't want to dilute it any more than you have to. If you're going to err on the side of a little rich. That isn't going to kill the saw. It'll follow the spark plug, but it won't kill the saw. But running them lean, especially when it's hot like this, she'll cook them. And I like these NATO cans, and I finally went and bought a red NATO can. Now, these are brand new, and they're made in Latvia. Fleet Farm was selling these. I've got all those green ones that I can fill at the local gas station, but at Fleet Farm, they will shut the pump off if I try filling them green ones. So I had to get one of the red ones. Now they're an $80 can, but that way I can fill them at the pump with the high octane because they've got the no ethanol 91 octane in some pumps. That's only for older vehicles and air-cooled motors. This one they allow me to fill. And 5 gallons will last me quite a while. Though I got about 2.5 gallons yet. But the one caution I was going to make, just make sure that your can is a gallon. Where you're marking, not an imperial gallon. I made that mistake one time. It was back in about 1980, 79 maybe. Made a trip up into Canada with a motorcycle, and the motorcycle was relatively new, or like maybe a year old. And I stopped at a dealership to change oil, and the mechanic came out and asked me, they had never seen one of these because they were kind of limited production. And he said, well, how much oil does it hold? because that was the old, my SR Yamaha that's got oil in the frame. That's actually the oil tank. And I said 2 quarts. And you come out later and say, oh, don't hold 2 quarts, it's all over the floor. Well, yeah, I didn't realize, the U.S. quart is this big, the Imperial quart is quite a little bigger. So it dumped it all over the floor. So there's a difference in the measurement, but what I took was one of those mixing cups, the ratio right, that are made for mixing for different 2-cycle oil, and I actually measured where a gallon goes in here, so I know I'm getting exactly right. Because it's a risky thing to play with. And I always use a regular Husqvarna oil, because that has always worked. And I can get that. Because the last thing you want to do is burn up an expensive saw.